Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, with the first of a few presentations that will look at Mao and the communists at Yan'an. In important ways, Yan'an was a continuation of the Jinggangshan and Jiangxi years, and too of the Long March. The harsh conditions, the heroics of the revolutionaries, the determination in the face of seemingly unsurmountable obstacles, all canonised in the Yan'an spirit. Because if the Long March had been a desperate affair, which it was, the position the communists found themselves in when they arrived in northern Shanxi was no better. But it was such an important period, lasting from 1936 through to the end of World War II in 1945, because it was here that Mao stamped his authority on the party and the revolution as its undisputed leader, signifying Marxism in the process and setting out principles that would be the foundation of his rule in the People's Republic of China. And it was at Yan'an that Mao took the fight to the Japanese, and in the process showed China that he was a greater nationalist than Chiang Kai-shek. Northern Shanxi was one of China's poorest and most backward regions. The land was poor and could only support a small and desperately impoverished population. Yan'an itself was a remote, impoverished frontier market town, used as an advanced military outpost protecting China's borders from the nomadic barbarians to the north. Its population was no more than 10,000. And the communists' military position was precarious, to say the least. 5,000 had survived the march, and though joined by other guerrilla forces, they were desperately weak, poorly armed and underfed. They did not add up to much. So what did the Yan'an Soviet look like? For much of the time, the communists lived in caves. This was quite normal outside of the towns in this particular region. The caves were man-made, dug out of the hillsides, or else adapted from natural caves. They offered relief from the summer sun, as well as the ravages of winter, and they offered protection from the Kuomintang air raids. Mao's cave had 3 rooms. Some, like the hospital, had electricity supplied by generators, and all in all compared favourably with the average peasant homes, which were built of straw and wood and had earthen floors. Mao built on the practice developed at Jinggangshan and at Jiangxi. Once a village or region had been taken over, the communists would encourage the population to attend meetings, which would elect committees to run the area, or else specific services such as health or education. Land redistribution was also a key issue to be addressed. Mao also felt that the party could learn from the people. All correct leadership, he said, is necessarily from the masses to the masses. This was Mao's notion of the mass line. Ideas should be taken from the people, turned into systematic policies and programs, and given back to the people to put into practice. This did give the peasantry a degree of self-control, but everything was under the ultimate control of the CCP and its overarching revolutionary committee. In trying to unite the party with the peasantry, Mao also introduced the principle of virtuous example, so that the peasantry and eventually the whole nation might learn from communist good practice. This again built on the practice introduced at Jinggangshan and at Jiangxi, and applied during the Long March. Mao was very clear that the Red Army must accept a political role as well as its obvious military function. So, the Red Army was the CCP's main propaganda weapon, showing the peasantry how life could be so much better under communist rule. This was a remarkable change for a country that for centuries had experienced the brutality of armies, whether they be those of emperors, imperial powers, warlords, or indeed the Kuomintang. The Japanese rape of Nanjing in 1937 certainly stood in stark contrast. However, where the peasants declined to cooperate, they were treated very differently. There were cases of villagers being forced to hand over a third of their harvests as the price for their non-cooperation. The need to maintain the fragile wartime alliance with the nationalists, as well as ensure the support of landlords and wealthier peasants in the fight against the Japanese, resulted in an official land policy that was somewhat more moderate when compared to the policy at Jiangxi. Although land redistribution was a priority, instead of seizing landlord holdings, the policy of reducing rents to no more than 1/3 of the crop, reducing interest rates and removing the extra legal ways by which landlords had traditionally exploited the peasants was adopted instead. As well as keeping enough landlords and wealthier peasants on board, it also proved popular enough with those who had been victims to the merciless exploitations which had been their norm. Of course, the official policy was not universally applied, and in many areas, but particularly where landlords fled with the retreating Kuomintang armies, the land of major landlords was seized and redistributed to land-hungry peasants. Also, shopkeepers, small capitalists and intellectuals would all have the same political rights as workers and peasants, and their freedoms would be protected. Large-scale capitalists would be treated favourably, and whereas the tax burden increased in Kuomintang-controlled areas, under the communists a progressive tax system was introduced, more being paid as more is earned. And to guard against famine, attempts were made to produce a reserve of grain equivalent to a year's harvest. Now I think that gives you a good idea of what Yan'an was like, and I hope it proves useful to you. I have more detail in my own written notes, which I can send you if you drop me an email, and as I always say, it will not lead to you being plagued by me. I promise. But for now, let me, as always, thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck with your studies. Cheers.